Hello, and thank you for joining me. My name is Mike Roberts, and welcome to this snippet from the Song of Solomon. And this is our 14th snippet. We're making our way through the second chapter of this wonderful book, which, as we read these verses together, we see a wonderful message being portrayed that is a message from the heart of Jesus to you and me. We're seeing a relationship begin to unfold between King Solomon, who represents Jesus in this story, and the Shulamite Maid, who has become his bride, and she represents you and me. And we're in chapter 2. We're picking up in the middle of a conversation between these two. And in the last snippet, in number 13, we talked about, in verse 1, the Shulamite Maid is talking, and she says, "I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys." And then Solomon chimes in, he interjects, he says, "Like a lily among the thorns, so is my darling among the maidens." So he singles her out. And we can see almost every time that Solomon speaks about his bride, he singles her out. And he makes her the most important, puts her in the highest place of all the maidens. He singles her out and expresses his love and affirms his heart for her, which again is what Jesus does for us. And so now he has singled her out, and now she speaks up and she says this about him. She singles him out. She says, "Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest." So all these trees in the forest, he's like this specific apple tree. And let's see why she chose that as a symbol of him. She says, "So is my beloved among the young men. In his shade I took great delight and sat down, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He has brought me to his banquet hall, and his banner over me is love." Then she says to him, "Sustain me with raisin cakes. Refresh me with apples, because I am lovesick. Let his left hand be under my head, and his right hand embrace me." So now she's speaking to him. She's speaking to Solomon, which is symbolic of our heart to Jesus, of a message we can give Jesus. And she says, "Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men." And it's interesting to me that she chose an apple tree to symbolize Solomon and for symbolizing Jesus in this passage. We can walk through the forest and there's a wide variety of trees, but not every one of them can feed us. But an apple tree can. So she says, like an apple tree. Then she says, "In his shade I took great delight and I sat down." Now we saw back in chapter 1, she said that she was dark but she was because she was burned by the sun. Well, that talks about she was forced to work out. She was a laborer, had to work out in the sun, and the sun burned her. There was no protection between the sun and her, which speaks of our trying to do things in our own strength, which we can never accomplish the righteousness of God in our own strength. And the sun had burned her and scorched her, and she felt self-conscious. But now she's been brought to a place where she is under the shade. His branches are shading her from the sun. And it says she sat down. She stopped trying to do things in her own strength. She stopped toiling and laboring out in the hot sun. Now she's resting under the shade of his branches. Then it goes on down and says, "He's brought me to his banqueting hall, and his banner over me is love." So in these verses we see two different times where he is covering her, which is what Jesus does for us. He's covered her, he's protected her from the hot sun. And then in his banqueting hall, with all of his friends and all of his guests, this wonderful feast prepared, his banner over her is love. So he's putting his banner over her. She's being identified as being his in the midst of all of his friends and all these guests that are there with them. And so what we see is the covering of Jesus over her, which again, he covered her sin. And he accomplished for her the things she could not accomplish for herself. All of her toiling and all of her laboring in the hot sun could not produce what he produced and what he is shading her with, as symbolized by the branches of this tree. And one of the great names of the Father in the Old Testament is Jehovah Nissi, which means the Lord is our banner. And so we can see the heart of God is to cover us. And Peter said in 1 Peter 4:8, he said, "Love will cover a multitude of sins." And you and I were born into sin. We're born in a place where the sun had scorched us, And nothing we could do, as hard as we would try, could take that away. But now we've been brought into a relationship with Jesus. And through that relationship, we're covered. His banner is over us is love, and love covers a multitude of sins.